This hearing will come to order, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the Joint Economic Committee's hearing titled Building a Better Labor Market, Empowering Older Workers for a Stronger Economy. I want to thank all of our truly distinguished witnesses for sharing their expertise today. And now let me turn to my brief opening statement. Without question, older workers are vital to our collective prosperity. And I'm not just saying that because I'm 71 years old. They support families and communities nationwide. They bring decades of earned experience and wisdom to businesses and marketplaces, large and small. Prior to the pandemic, older Americans made up 40% of the national economic output, despite making up only 35% of the population. And over the last 20 years, the share of older workers has almost doubled, a trend that's set to continue even after the pandemic. As the United States continues its strong recovery, a primary task before us in Congress must be answering how we can build a stronger and more resilient economy where the benefits from economic growth are broadly shared. Key to such an economy is a better labor market that ensures all workers, including older workers, have access to quality jobs that meet their needs and are free from discrimination. Over the past year, the U.S. economy has experienced record job growth. Over 6.6 million new jobs created in 2021 and almost 500,000 more in January alone. 6.9% economic growth just in the fourth quarter. This robust labor market recovery, thought unimaginable in the spring of 2020 when unemployment was nearing 15%, is a testament to the American Rescue Plan, other emergency pandemic relief, and the widespread availability of vaccines and testing. But even as we recognize the record-breaking economic accomplishments of the last year, we must also address the ways our recovery has not yet reached everyone, including older workers. Older workers have long faced unique challenges in the workforce, and these challenges were exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic. Decades of diminished bargaining power, stagnant wage growth, diminishing returns from additional years of working, and increasingly strenuous and dangerous jobs have contributed to widespread economic insecurity among older workers and constricted broad-based economic growth. The pandemic has also shined new light on the inadequacy of our care infrastructure to help older workers navigate work and care responsibilities. This has been particularly harmful to older Black and Hispanic women who typically shoulder significant caregiving responsibilities. For example, 1/3 of home health aides are aged 55 and older, yet care industry wages are low and care work is very physically demanding. This creates an untenable situation for aging providers as they are simultaneously less physically able to continue their work, but also financially unable to save and retire securely. Further, more than 1 in 5 workers aged 45 to 64 reports being a caregiver to a parent. Yet the United States does not guarantee any workers the right to paid leave, and older workers are even less likely than their younger counterparts to have access to paid sick days. This forces many older workers to make the impossible choice between caring for themselves or a loved one and getting a paycheck, which harms workers, businesses, and the broader economy. Today, we're seeing these decade-long trends impacting older workers coming to a head. Just as companies have historically used downturns to prune workplaces of older workers, the same appears to be true of the coronavirus recession. At least 1.7 million more older workers than expected retired due to the pandemic recession, and the effects have been particularly harmful for older Black workers and those without a college degree. Despite media coverage of high-income older workers choosing retirement to spend more time on hobbies and with their families, evidence shows this isn't the reality for many older workers. The reality is that over the course of the pandemic, many older workers have been forced out of jobs to live on insufficient retirement income. For the first time in 50 years, the unemployment rate for older workers was higher than that of mid-career workers. While rates have stabilized, older workers remain overrepresented among those who are currently long-term unemployed. Because our retirement system has not kept up with the needs of the aging workforce, the typical worker in the United States has zero retirement savings. That's right, no retirement savings at all. And among those that do, the amount is wholly insufficient to sustain a pre-retirement standard of living. As those who've been forced into early retirement may look to be rehired, research shows they will experience significant barriers. Particularly in recessionary periods, older workers face discrimination and stigma from periods of long-term unemployment, both of which limit their reemployment opportunities. No worker should be forced into early retirement, and at the same time, No one should be forced to work long into their golden years because of insufficient retirement savings. As members of Congress, addressing these challenges in order to help build a better labor market for older workers and create a stronger economy is central to our work. I look forward to this discussion, our expert witnesses, and learning from them today. Let me now introduce the ranking member of the Joint Economic Committee, Senator Lee from Utah. Senator, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Older Americans are the bedrock of our communities, and it's hard to overstate their role. We rely as a society on grandparents for everything, from helping to care for our children to building our churches and volunteering in our local charities. Increasingly, many older Americans also make really vital contributions in the workforce. Many of America's seniors, and more of them, in fact, are choosing to work because they find work to be a source of engagement and meaning in the transition of their golden years. Tad Greener is a fellow Utahn who was missing the social connections and the professional satisfaction associated with being at work after being out of a job for the past 2 years due to his health. Like so many other older Americans, when he started looking for a job again, he thought he'd never be able to get a leg up navigating the endless changes that had been brought about by the pandemic. But that's when Tad saw a story about Return Utah, a great new program created by Utah's Lieutenant Governor, Deidre Henderson, to help Utahns who are looking for work after an extended absence. Tad applied, and he was surprised to find that the Utah Office of Energy Development needed someone with his technical skills. Now, although the position was temporary, after just 2 months into the job, he was made a permanent team member. And he's now able to put his many years of experience to good use in his new position. Tad's story is inspiring. It's inspiring for the millions of American workers who are still on the sidelines. And it's instructive for us today as we seek to understand the barriers that older Americans face. As many choose to work longer, a strong labor market with rising wages for all is the most effective way to create new opportunities and support older Americans. Now, the good news for us today is that older Americans are doing better than they ever have before. Thanks to improved health and less physically demanding jobs, many older Americans are remaining in the workforce longer, and more employers are benefiting from their reliability and their experience. Older Americans who choose to retire are also better set up for economic security than ever before. Americans have never saved more for retirement or had higher incomes in their golden years. Poverty among seniors is lower than among any other age group. And the preliminary data indicate that those who left the workforce during the pandemic did so because they can better afford to retire after doing that. Older workers are doing remarkably well. What older workers don't need are new special interest programs and policies cooked up in Washington and delivered half-baked by bureaucrats from thousands of miles away. So first, let's fix what's broken. Government spending has stoked the highest inflation rate this country has seen in 4 decades. And it's hurting all Americans, including our seniors, many of whom live on fixed incomes. Government programs intended to care for seniors often punish those who just want to stay connected to the workforce longer. And the threat of vaccine mandates continues to hang over the country, cruelly forcing Americans to choose between the freedom to make their own health decisions and their jobs. Ultimately, a thriving, unencumbered economy is, in fact, the best way to allow older Americans to make their choices and make those choices that are best suited for themselves and for their families, whether that's spending more time with the kids and the grandkids, volunteering in a local congregation, maintaining a long, healthy work life, or all of the above. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on how we can foster this type of prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lee, very much. Now I'd like to introduce our four distinguished witnesses. Dr. Teresa Gilliard serves as Professor of Economics and Policy Analysis at the New School for Social Research. She also directs the Schwartz Center for Economic Policy Analysis, where she leads the Retirement Equity Lab. She's a labor economist and a nationally recognized author and an expert in retirement and economic security. She's written extensively on older workers and offers various solutions to the growing retirement crisis. Dr. Gilliard received a PhD in economics from the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Monique Morrissey is an economist for the Economic Policy Institute. Before joining the Institute, Dr. Morrissey worked at the AFL-CIO, Office of Investment, and at the Financial Market Center. Dr. Morrissey has written extensively about older workers, retirement security, compensation, and financial markets. In recent work, Dr. Morrissey examined the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on older workers and ways to ensure they can fully participate in the recovery. Dr. Morrissey received her PhD in economics from American University. Ms. Jocelyn Frye is president of the National Partnership for Women and Families. Prior to this role, she was a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Before her time with the center, Ms. Frye worked in the White House under President Obama, serving as Deputy Assistant to the President and Director of Policy and Special Projects for Michelle Obama. She's an expert on policies that would improve the quality of work and well-being for women, older workers, and their family. Ms. Frye is a graduate of Harvard Law School. Dr. Andrew Biggs is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. His work focuses on Social Security reform, state and local government pensions, and public sector pay and benefits. Before joining AEI, Dr. Biggs served as the Principal Deputy Commissioner of the Social Security Administration in 2007. And in 2005, he was an Associate Director of the White House National Economic Council, where he worked on Social Security reform. Dr. Biggs received a PhD in government from the London School of Economics. So let's begin with Dr. Gilliard with your testimony, and then we'll continue in the order of introductions. Dr. Gilliard, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman Beyer and Ranking Member Lee, and all the other committee members that showed up. You're about to tackle the special issue the nation faces, as nearly half of the 11 million, about 12 million new jobs that are projected to be created by 2030. Though half of those jobs will be filled with workers over 55. The sheer scale and the fast growth of older workers means that they dominate the conditions in the labor market, and their falling status will hurt the whole economy. Now, for a small minority of older workers, we estimate about 11%, we have great news. They still work, though they have more than enough to retire on. Presumably, their jobs are compelling, they're interesting, and they're decently paid. But most older workers don't face those conditions. Older workers are more likely to be working poor than younger workers. 26% of older women and about 1/3 of older non-white workers earn under $15 per hour, making them officially working poor. And older workers practically stop being paid for their experience and their loyalty. The rate of return for working one extra year has fallen cumulatively by 45% in the last 30 years. And for some older workers, technology might make their work more easier, but technology can also intensify work. What we're seeing in the data is as computers are spreading and some of our most robust sectors thrive on low-wage older workers. Think about home and personal health care, janitorial service, and warehousing. More older workers are stooping and bending. More older workers are required to intensely concentrate and to use keen eyesight, and more older workers are required to do physical labor. Over 42% of older Black men are in physically demanding jobs. And yes, more older workers are working, but despite all that work, the US has among the highest elderly poverty rates in the OECD. And all that work, coupled with unequal longevity gains, means that American workers have the fewest years in retirement, 17 years on average. Black men can expect about 13 years on average. While most workers in the G7 have well over 22 years in retirement, and they face very small poverty rates. Yes, more older workers want to work, but about half of workers now in middle-class households, half of older workers now in middle-class households will be downwardly mobile into poverty or near poverty in the next 10 years. And that's because the median account balance for all workers is zero. The median account balances for older workers is $15,000. And even if they want to work, most retirees are forced out of the labor force. The majority say they were forced to retire much earlier than they expected. Now, in dynamic markets defined by bargaining relationships and power, Nobelist economist Amartya Sen observes that when a growing vicariate of people, in this case older workers, do not have basic capacities, in this case the basic capacity to retire, they do not have the power to bargain for better jobs. But if older workers had more bargaining power, 1/3 of younger family members providing time and money to their elders would get relief. If older workers had more bargaining power, communities would spend less on fragile elders, and they would have more aggregate demand in their community, and that especially helps in recessions. If older workers had more bargaining power, we would reward the employers who are doing the right thing, those employers that hire, train, and pay older workers well. And finally, if older workers had more bargaining power, we would improve their retirement income security. Now, you may hear about rosy models that conclude that working longer solves about everything, especially helping retirement income. But those models wrongly assume something I thought was always true, but it's wrong. Older workers are now instead of saving for retirement and delay claiming Social Security, older workers now, because of the low pay, are claiming Social Security while they're working, and they're also drawing down their savings. So the stark truths about the conditions older workers work mean that the idea of working longer is not as costless as we thought. It's quite costly. Now, Congress could help older workers right now. You could form an older workers bureau like you formed the Women's Bureau back in 1990. The Older Workers Bureau could coordinate the research, and it could recommend fixes for the issues we're going to hear today, including the highest level of perceived age discrimination in the last 30 years, probably because of the pandemic accelerated this. Congress can directly expand pension coverage. I created a plan with former President Trump's chief economist, Kevin Hassett, and the Economic Innovation Group. And that plan provides a government savings match to workers in the bottom half of the earnings distribution. This reliable savings vehicle works alongside and is modeled after the federal thrift savings plan. Congress can help improve pay conditions by boosting the minimum wage, protecting union rights, and expanding sick leave. Higher pay creates a virtuous circle of creating more retirement security. Congress could also make Medicare the first payer, and that would lower the cost of health insurance for employers who hire older workers. Strengthening older worker bargaining power helps more than just older workers. Better jobs for older people improves productivity for the whole economy. It helps younger family members. It helps aging communities, those regions of the country with lots of older people, stabilize the spending power, and it helps all workers get the leverage they need to improve their jobs. Thank you.
Dr. Gilliard, thank you very much, and thank you for the very concrete policy ideas. Let's now turn to Dr. Monique Morrissey for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Beyer, Ranking Member Lee, and members of the committee for inviting me to participate in this hearing. My name is Monique Morrissey. I'm an economist at the Economic Policy Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank created in 1986 to include the needs of low and middle wage workers in policy discussions. The pandemic recession was unusual. It wasn't triggered by a financial crisis, but rather social distancing in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which affected both labor supply and demand. Layoffs were concentrated in services like leisure and hospitality, while health and safety concerns and caregiving responsibilities loomed large in workers' decisions to leave the workforce. In previous recessions, older workers' labor force participation increased as they delayed retirement in response to falling asset values. In contrast, homeowners and 401k participants benefited from rising asset values during the pandemic, contributing to an increase in retirement among some privileged workers. In the short but steep recession, workers ages 55 and older saw employment declines similar to those for prime age workers. In a more typical recession, older workers are less likely to lose their jobs due to seniority. Older workers were less likely to work in occupations and industries most affected by the pandemic, but they were more likely to leave jobs due to health risks. Job losses were greater among vulnerable groups of older workers, including women, workers of color, non-college workers, and part-time workers. A robust federal response, including relief checks and expanded unemployment benefits, brought about rapid recovery despite the pandemic's persistence. This is in sharp contrast to the slow recovery after the Great Recession that caused lasting damage to vulnerable workers and the economy. As the economy recovered, older workers were slower to return to work than their younger counterparts, accounting for over a third of missing jobs at the end of last year, even though they were a quarter of the pre-pandemic workforce. However, January data shows that the employment rate for older workers is now 1.4 percentage points below pre-pandemic rate, roughly the same as for younger workers. Even if older workers no longer account for a disproportionate share of job losses, the impact can be and was devastating. Older workers face greater earnings losses than their younger counterparts because they're likely to be unemployed longer, and their new jobs often pay significantly less than their old ones due to the loss of employer-specific skills and age discrimination. Older workers benefited from measures taken during the pandemic to extend the duration of unemployment benefits, increase benefit amounts, and expand eligibility. These measures help the economy recover by shoring up consumption while allowing workers to find jobs suited to their skills. Some older workers also benefited from funding for work sharing programs that encourage employers to reduce hours rather than lay off workers. We should be most concerned about two groups of older workers who experienced disproportionate job losses during the pandemic: lower wage, non-college workers under age 65 who aren't prepared for retirement for the most part, and frontline workers in industries and occupations essential to our economic recovery and future prosperity, including workers in education, transportation, postal service, healthcare, and caregiving jobs. Frontline workers paid a steep price for our failure to protect workers during the pandemic. Though infection rates are declining, strong occupational safety and health standards remain a priority for workers and the economy. Many older workers left the paid workforce due to poor health. Others were sidelined caring for family members. Shrinking employment in the care sector affected family caregivers as well as older workers employed in these low-paid and often dangerous occupations. The Build Back Better Act would greatly improve the lives of older workers and enable some to return to work. It includes funding for home and community-based services, creates a paid family and medical leave program, and improves the pay and working conditions of caregivers. The United States is one of few countries that do not guarantee access to paid sick leave. This is bad enough under normal circumstances, but especially in a pandemic, when many sick workers face a harsh choice between lost earnings and endangering others. 2/3 of low-wage workers lack access to paid sick leave, including many home health aides and other frontline workers. My testimony focused on pandemic-related effects and policies, but challenges facing older workers predate the pandemic. Most policies that would help older workers also help other vulnerable workers, including raising the minimum wage, strengthening collective bargaining rights, guaranteeing paid sick leave or paid leave in general, addressing unpredictable and involuntary part-time schedules, combating misclassification of workers as contractors, and other policies that support good jobs with decent pay and benefits. Thank you.
Dr. Morrissey, thank you very much. We'll next hear from Ms. Jocelyn Frye. Ms. Frye, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chairman Byer, Ranking Member Lee, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and discuss challenges facing older workers. Over the last 5 decades, the National Partnership for Women and Families has worked to improve women's lives and tackle gender-based barriers that erode economic opportunities and the health and well-being, not only of women, but all people. We believe that prioritizing equity and a comprehensive care infrastructure are essential to creating effective workplaces and promoting economic stability, especially for older workers who are vital to their families and our economy, but are increasingly on shaky ground. Too often, the narratives about older workers are oversimplified simplified stories about comfortable retirements and financial stability, but these stories ignore the precarious economic realities of many older workers, especially older women, particularly older women of color. And I want to focus my remarks on three specific challenges that many of these workers face: ongoing age discrimination, the lack of robust care infrastructure, and the need to improve job quality in many of the jobs that older women workers hold. First, older workers continue to face discrimination in the workplace. According to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, 6 in 10 workers over the age of 45 report that they have seen or experienced age discrimination at work, with workers of color and women reporting these discrimination problems at even higher rates. Data from 2017 show that an increasing majority of age discrimination charges are filed by women. We also know that because of longstanding patterns of occupational segregation, many older women and workers of color are often segregated in lower paying jobs with few benefits. Second, women workers are expected to shoulder the bulk of caregiving responsibilities for their families as paid and unpaid caregivers with too little support. And this is true for women of all ages. Despite the fact that every family is likely to face a caregiving challenge, we lack much needed care supports at the national level, and we treat caregiving as a private responsibility for families to navigate alone. These care obligations affect women throughout their careers, with many cycling out of the workforce. And economic loss is estimated at $650 billion less per year in GDP due to women's declining labor force participation. Older women workers continue to provide essential care for their loved ones, even as they address their own care needs. The historical roots of caregiving as mainly being performed by Black women and other women of color has meant that care work and care workers have often been devalued with little regard to their own care needs. Third, many older workers work in jobs with low wages and without the supports needed for a secure retirement. Women make up nearly 2/3 of workers in the 40 lowest paid jobs, with women of color especially overrepresented. Many of these jobs also have few benefits, which makes saving for retirement even harder. 1 in 3 older women workers, disproportionately women of color, work in jobs that are physically demanding, that may be difficult to continue as they get older. On average, a woman 50 or older who leaves the workforce early for caregiving will lose an estimated $400,000 in lost income and retirement benefits. These three problems have been on full display throughout the pandemic. Women's labor force participation is lower than it was 30 years ago. Caregiving challenges continue to wreak havoc on women's employment, and older workers have seen notable declines in employment and labor force participation since 2019. The current moment calls for a reset squarely focused on improving employment opportunities and outcomes for older women, older workers, and growing our economy. There are several policy solutions which should be top priorities. First, it is long past time for the United States to invest in a robust care infrastructure that ensures a continuum of support for care across the lifespan and reduces longstanding gender and racial inequities. This means investing in a national paid family and medical leave program, along with other care investments, such as strengthening home and community-based services to address workers' caregiving needs and to boost women's labor force participation. Second, Congress should take actions to improve job quality, to help boost wages and economic supports for workers by raising the minimum wage and strengthening pay protections, especially in caregiving occupations disproportionately held by older women of color workers. Finally, action is needed to strengthen enforcement of protections against age and other forms of employment discrimination. This includes increased funding to key enforcement agencies and initiating a specific initiative to focus on women's employment and the different factors impeding women's participation in our economy, especially for older women. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Frye, very much. And finally, we'll hear from Dr. Andrew Biggs from AEI. Dr. Biggs.
Thank you very much, Chairman Beyer, Ranking Member Lee, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to speak today about employment at older ages, the opportunity extended work lives present, the challenges along the way, and how far we've already come. The latter stages of our careers are the gateway to retirement, and research finds that extending our work lives is an incredibly powerful tool to enhance retirement income security. Delayed retirement gives savings more time to grow, increases Social Security benefits, and reduces the number of years that savings must cover. The question is, can Americans do it? I've been working in retirement policy since the late 1990s, and all of that time we've heard why Americans can't work longer. Our health is too poor, our jobs too physically demanding, and age discrimination is too widespread for longer work lives to meaningfully contribute to retirement income security. I don't think we'll ever stop hearing those things. But Americans didn't listen to the experts, and they worked anyway. Employment rates among near retirees are today at historical highs, despite the COVID pandemic. And despite perceptions that older workers can find only low-paid jobs, median earnings among near retirees who work exceed those of younger adults. On top of this, the average American claims Social Security benefits over 1.3 years later today than they did in 1990, boosting their benefits throughout retirement. And employment rates have increased the most for Americans with the least education. So it is not merely people like us who are extending their work lives. These are things that have already happened. Americans did what the experts said they can't, and they've been rewarded for it. While you may hear that most Americans can't afford a decent retirement, the data show that Americans' retirement savings are at record levels, and savings have increased in every age, income, educational, and racial or ethnic group. Americans' retirement incomes are also at record levels, not just among the richest retirees, but across the income distribution. Retirees' incomes have risen dramatically faster than incomes for working-age households, and poverty in old age is at record lows. Moreover, the Social Security Administration's multi-million-dollar retirement income model projects that retirement incomes will continue to rise and poverty will continue to fall. OECD data show that Americans work longer and save more for retirement than most other developed countries. And our reward is that according to the OECD, the typical US retiree has the highest disposable income in the developed world. US retirees also report the highest level of financial security compared to other countries, with the greatest number of retirees saying they can maintain their pre-retirement standard of living, and the smallest number saying their incomes fall short. But it isn't all rainbows and kittens. We can do better, and one place to look is federal entitlement programs, which can present negative incentives for older workers to delay retirement. For instance, we call Social Security an earned benefit because the Social Security taxes we pay result in higher benefits in retirement. But that's not true for most Americans who choose to delay retirement. My own research has shown that the median or typical worker who delays retirement by 1 year will receive only 2.5 cents in extra retirement benefits for each dollar of additional taxes they pay. That's a terrible deal, and it comes from certain quirks in the Social Security benefit formula. Economic research shows that near retirees are particularly sensitive to these incentives, since unlike middle-aged workers, they have the option to retire. Fixing them could encourage more Americans to work longer. Medicare also presents challenges to work in old age. Medicare typically covers health costs beginning at age 65, but not for workers who continue to work in jobs that offer health insurance. Instead, Medicare acts as a secondary payer and covers only what the employer plan won't. This denies seniors the benefits they paid for and raises costs for employers. This either reduces incentives for employers to hire older Americans, or if these costs are passed on to employees, reduces their salaries. Neither the Social Security nor the Medicare fixes would be cheap, but enhancing work at older ages brings incredible benefits to Americans, provides badly needed employees to American firms, and would generate new tax revenue for the federal government. I have a more general point that applies to a broad range of policies. A strong labor market in which older Americans can easily find jobs is the best social program, the best weapon against employers who might discriminate by age, and the best way to help Americans cross the finish line into a successful retirement. The strong labor market just prior to COVID wasn't merely for near retirees. It was good for Americans with disabilities, those with less education or skills, or those coming back from a drug problem or a criminal record. Making jobs plentiful makes nearly every other problem Americans face easier to solve. As a committee with a broad purview, the JEC should think about the myriad ways in which we can build a vibrant labor market for older workers. Thank you for your attention today.
Dr. Biggs, thank you very much. I appreciate all those inputs, and we now begin our round of questions. I'll start. Dr. Gilliard, you've been a strong advocate of the idea of an older workers bureau in the Department of Labor. How would this be part of the solution? Thank you.
Has to happen. I don't want to create big government bureaucracies, but having one place in the government that focused all the research about the changing issues facing older workers. Having one place in the government that can actually combine all the data that Social Security has, even the PBGC, the Labor Department has, and the Treasury has on where older workers are saving, would actually give a really good picture of what's happening to them, but also an older workers bureau filled with lots of economists, would also tell us how this big wave of older workers are affecting the whole economy, how employers who do the right thing are really adding to productivity as workers get old and others don't. It would look at industries that are hiring a lot of older workers and really have concrete ideas besides, oh, just don't think badly of older workers. It would really attack the problems you're going to be facing in the next 10 years. More age discrimination, more insecurity, less retirement security. So some good heads have to think about it all the time.
Great. Thank you very much. Dr. Morrissey, much of the stories currently in the mainstream media is about the financially secure older workers happily choosing to play golf and take care of grandkids. Is this really what's happening? And how's the media getting this wrong? What's the real story?
Thank you. Well, there are a few older workers who fall into that category. I mean, we have seen an uptick among, college-educated white men, age 70 and older, who probably were semi-retired, probably already taking Social Security, and then who decided to leave, probably for some mix of financial reasons and because, their work might have dried up and maybe COVID fears, things like that. But this is a very small share, and these are not the people that we're worried about. They're leaving semi-retirement is going to have very little impact on their families and very little impact on the economy. The people we should really be worried about are this large group of workers under 65 who are not college educated, who are predominantly workers of color, and who are, we are seeing very large, not necessarily retirements, but that employment declines. So those are the people that I am most concerned about in terms of the impact on their families and on themselves, because they're not ready for retirement and they've been forced out of the workforce, and it's clearly not a choice of theirs. And by the way, this is also a problem that predated the pandemic, but the pandemic just made it much, much worse. Another group of workers that I'm particularly worried about, rather than this very small group of relatively privileged workers, is workers who were, for whom they might be able to comfortably retire. A lot of these workers are not 65 either, but school teachers, nurses, they're probably, they're more likely to have pensions, they're more likely to have comfortable retirements, but they're critical to the economy's recovery. And we're seeing large numbers of these workers also leaving. So for the economy, that group is especially critical, to stem that outflow. And for the sake of the workers themselves and their families, we really need to make sure that the non-college workers under age 65 are able to stay in the workforce or return to the workforse. Anyhow, and the other thing is that just there was sort of one of the reasons this got a lot of attention is because there was a disconnect between people. There was some suggestion by one Federal Reserve article about the fact that there was fewer people coming back in from retirement, and that there had been a decline in workers going from unemployment to retirement. But that was actually sort of a mismeasurement. The retirement rate of people who were unemployed going into permanent retirement declined slightly, but the sheer numbers grew dramatically because there were so many more unemployed workers. So I actually want to do a shout out to some grad students. Some of Teresa's team at SEPA were the ones who basically figured out why there was this miscommunication or misunderstanding about what was happening in terms of inflows and outflows out of retirement. So they were able to, they untangled the two effects. So you might have a slight decline in the people who are unemployed leaving retirement, but there's so many more unemployed older workers that that was really what was causing a decline in older workers. And so that it's a confusing thing, but thanks to Teresa's team at New School, they figured out what was going on there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Morrissey. Let me now recognize Senator Lee for his questions. Yeah, if the senator, I see you're present in the digital mix, if you're also present in real life. And give Senator Lee just 1 minute.
Okay, well, Senator Lee is running a couple minutes late. I think we're moving to Schweikert.
Okay, so my good friend from Arizona, the ranking member of the House side on the Joint Economic Committee, David Schweikert, floor is yours. And we need to hear you, David.
But Chairman Beyer, at some point we may be all doing this in something called the metaverse, where we all get to functionally be avatars. And I will tell you, and actually a couple of your Democrat witnesses, I'm actually familiar with a little bit of their work, and I have some frustrations because I actually think we actually have some problems in our data matching, but that's sort of secondary. I have a personal fixation on our demographic curves and what's happening to the working poor right now. And we have to first have a moment of honesty here. The last year has been pretty brutal to the working poor, particularly if you adjust for transfer payments, inflation, populations coming across the border with similar skill sets, and what that may mean over the next decade of earning power. So maybe there's something, Chairman Beyer, you and I could actually, particularly from Ways and Means standpoint, find a collective understanding or agreement. And that is, what policy sets? Are there tweaks in Medicare? Are there tweaks in Social Security? Are there tweaks in the ability to save or incentive to save, or savers credit type of matching that we tried working on last year that would provide some additional retirement security, particularly for the probably three quartiles that we're most worried about? Mr. Biggs, if I came to you tomorrow and asked, what tweaks would you actually make in Social Security policy that doesn't ultimately hurt the trust fund, or tweaks in Medicare policy that might actually have a healthcare positive to the trust fund, but would encourage our brothers and sisters who are older to stay in the labor force? And we could also have the anecdotal discussions, which I despise the anecdotal discussions, but it's what we all do, of health benefits and those things for staying in the labor force. Mr. Biggs, what policy sets would you move forward on?
Well, thank you very much, Congressman. Your proviso that they don't hurt the health of the trust fund is where things get difficult. But let me just touch on 2 points. One is that you want to make work pay at older ages. As I point out, with Social Security, it doesn't. If you're somebody who delays retirement, almost all the extra money you pay just goes to Social Security. It doesn't go to your own benefits. It's very unusual for somebody to get their money back at that stage of the game. So what I have proposed is reducing or eliminating the payroll tax at older ages in order to kind of sweeten the deal for people to keep working. A place like the United Kingdom does that. Once you reach their normal retirement age, their version of the Social Security tax goes away because you're not getting anything for it. Similarly with Medicare, to go back to the Social Security tax, that's actually, the research shows that the near retirees are very sensitive to these incentives. So reducing the payroll tax at older ages would cost Social Security money. But if more people worked, they would be paying Medicare taxes, they'd be paying federal income taxes, they'd be paying state and local income taxes. On Medicare, I think the Medicare as secondary payer issue at age 65 that is something that if Medicare took over as a primary payer, again, it's going to cost you money. But that would it would make older workers more attractive to employers. It would make work more attractive for seniors because it would raise their wages. Evening it out is the tricky part. And when I've talked about both of these things, I think you want to think about them in the context of more comprehensive reforms. If I'm thinking about Social Security, to be frank, I would scale down benefits for high earners. These are folks who their retirement savings are through the roof. They can and will save more for retirement. They will work longer. That in itself will help the economy. So I think there's ways we can make this package work, but we have to be not afraid of reforming these plans. A lot of times people are very afraid of any sort of change, but we need to think creatively about it.
Okay. Would you actually, Medicare itself does have some income adjustments. Would you steepen that curve a bit and use some of those resources to help finance the incentives to stay in the labor force for, some of the lower quartiles of income?
I would, I mean, I think Medicare has more effective means testing on the benefit end than Social Security does. There are some people, I'm not primarily a healthcare guy, there's some experts I work with who say that that means test should be based not on your income in retirement, but on your lifetime earnings as a way to encourage people, to save and work more, not to
Okay.
do the opposite. But it's really thinking about how you want to kind of put the.
I think I have a fairly robust article talking about that same formula. Chairman Beyer and Senator Lee, this is one, we've spent a decade sort of talking about the baby boomers coming, and we avoided the discussion because somehow Congress forgot there were people turning 65, and now we're well into that retirement cycle. The nature of work has changed. We're no longer out there digging ditches or certain types of labor. And the United States needs talent in the labor force, particularly if we're going to have GDP or economic expansion. There's got to be a way that both the right and the left can actually sort of see fit to create these incentives that become positive for all of us. So with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Schweiker, very much. We'll next hear from Senator Klobuchar if she is here. And if the senator is not, I'd love to recognize the ranking member. There she is. Senator Klobuchar.
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Right.
But to be
Well,
followed by
thank you.
Senator Lee.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And I want to thank the witnesses. I think this is such an important topic. And I want to thank the chairman for going ahead with this hearing. I've been actually pretty obsessed with this for a while because we have a lot of seniors in our state. And I've really believe that there's a lot of people that want to work. And we also have huge workforce issues in our state. And there's many solutions to that, including apprenticeships, immigration reform, but this is one of them, and making sure people are having the best experience they can and being part of our economy if they want to be. So my first question is of Dr. Gilliard. Data provided by the Schwartz Center for Economic Policy Analysts shows that for decades, returns to experience has been falling in the United States. Meaning workers have a lower rate of return on income for each additional year worked. Can you tell me, Doctor, a little more about this statistic from your organization, and why is it a indicator of the challenges older workers face?
Right. So we saw that starting to happen in the last recession, in the financial recession. This comes from work also at the Urban Institute. It just seemed like employers are abandoning older workers. They're not training them. They don't value the experience. But there are some sectors that are hoovering up older workers. Warehousing, the stooping and bending I talked about in Amazon warehouses. We had an Academy Award-winning movie about that, and home health care. But back to your question, the return on experience is a result of employers not valuing older workers, and it means that those catch-up contributions that Congress put in to have that extra way that older workers can save for retirement. It doesn't work for people who peak around 45. So Congress has to completely rethink the way you do retirement security because of the decline in the returns to experience.
Very good. Thank you. Dr. Morrissey, could you talk about how the work sharing benefit, especially benefits older workers in particular? You talked about how that is an alternative to traditional unemployment, and I can kind of answer the question on my own, I think, in my own mind, but I want to hear from all of you. So, Dr. Morrissey.
Thank you for that question. I mean, first of all, I just want to make it clear that even though I'm a huge fan of work sharing, it was not, and I'm very, very grateful to Congress for including work sharing in the CARES Act, which was wonderful. I think it was underutilized and remains underutilized in the states that provide it. And what work sharing does is it allows employers, instead of having to lay off workers so they can access unemployment benefits, it allows them to reduce hours across the board and then compensates workers not for unemployment, but for lower, for lower hours. And some countries in Europe, Germany and Belgium in particular, use this a lot. And why it matters in particular to older workers is because when older workers sever their employment relationship with an established employer, they are in the, then they face all of those challenges that we talked about earlier: long-term unemployment, discrimination in hiring, seeing much lower pay in whatever job they're able to get after the fact. So it is particularly important for these workers that they don't actually sever that employment relationship. They have employer-specific skills. They have more tenure on average with the employer. And this is very valuable. And so it's not only important for them, but it's also important for the economy, because even though the extended unemployment benefits did help with job matching and allowing older workers to get better fit jobs after the fact, often there's a mismatch with the jobs they get after the fact because they're desperate to get any kind of work at all. I do think Congress acted very strongly, very well this time around to expand eligibility for benefits, extended unemployment, and better benefits. But
Thank you,
the work
Dr.
sharing would have been better.
I just
Sorry.
want to get one more question in and not cut off
Okay. Sorry.
another member of Congress here. Ms. Frye, I know in your testimony, you talked about that we should dispel the notion of an average older worker and highlight the different lived experiences of older American workers. Could you quickly expand on that?
Sure, thank you. And I will say so quickly. I think the important thing to recognize is that, people come to the table differently. What we know is that, there are existing disparities in wages among women of color. And so many of them simply don't have the earnings necessary to amass the robust retirement funds that allow them to sort of have a comfortable retirement. They are also in low wage jobs disproportionately, and they have insecure jobs because they're more likely to have caregiving. So we have to have a diverse understanding of the experiences they bring to the table.
Well, thank you. And just two quick follow-ups on that. One, we all know the stats on women because they may leave the workforce for a while to raise a family and the like, and then they have less retirement, less money coming in Social Security. And just the second point, Mr. Chair, is I have found having older workers in workplaces. I had one in my state office for quite a while. It was a complete joy because the younger workers, let us say, will always go to them for advice. And that's good to have a mix of people, including romantic advice. And I just found that to be such a nice mix of people. And I think that is true in all workplaces. And we should highly value some of the older workers and bring them back if they want to. So thanks.
Thank you, Senator, very much. Great insight. And now the senator from Utah, Senator Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Biggs, we hear a lot these days about a retirement crisis. Many say that we're saving less and less for retirement, and that fewer and fewer Americans, especially lower income Americans, have access to retirement savings account. But your research, as best I can tell, tells a different story. As you explained in your written testimony, your research, in fact, finds that Americans are actually more confident about their ability to retire comfortably, and that the United States, in fact, ranks among the leading nations in the world in terms of retiree disposable income. Can you elaborate a little bit about what makes America different in that regard? And tell us sort of why are our seniors better prepared for retirement, and why are they working longer, more productive careers than anyone else in the world? As you noted, this seems like an accomplishment, one that deserves our celebration.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Lee. Yeah, I think a lot of times we don't give ourselves credit. We focus too much on the problems we face and not enough on the accomplishment and the progress that we've made over the years. And the state of Americans' retirement income security, that's sort of the backdrop for hearings like this, because work in late middle age, it can make or break your retirement. So maybe I can just give you some facts, and these are facts. I mean, compared to back when traditional defined benefit pensions were at their peak in the 70s, these are the pensions that everybody pines for, says that these were the best pensions ever. But compared to then, the share of workers participating in retirement plans has increased dramatically. The percentage of our salaries that we save for retirement has increased dramatically. Total retirement plan assets have increased 7-fold since then. Fed data show the retirement savings are up in every age group, every income group, every educational racial group. The number of retirees who receive benefits from a private retirement plan once they retire, that's up dramatically. And across the board, at all parts of income distribution, retirement incomes are record highs, while poverty and old age is at record lows. If you go to opinion surveys, 80% of retirees tell Gallup they have enough money not just to survive, but to live comfortably. Well, only 5% tell a Fed survey they're finding it hard to get by. And these aren't anecdotes that I come up with. They're not just numbers I cook up. These are actual data points. And so what we need to do is square what, say, the other witnesses are saying with the actual data of what we've seen happen. And what I think the way you bring this together is, despite the problems that people face, whether it's in finding jobs at good wages at older ages, or getting access to a retirement plan, or affording to put money into it, we are clearly better off in terms of retirement preparation, retirement incomes today than we were in the past. Just to sum up, in my testimony, I gave the example of the French scientist who said the bee should not be able to fly because the aerodynamics of the bee aren't very good, and the bee doesn't know this and he flies anyway. And this is the case where everybody told Americans, oh, you can't do it. And we did it. 401ks are more common because they don't place a lot of burdens on employers to run. We have a more free, vibrant labor market. That gives more opportunities for people to work longer. It rewards them for doing that. So our system is messy, but it actually works. And the data show that it's worked better than a lot of other countries.
Oh, thank you. That's very good insight. Research gathered by my staff on the Joint Economic Committee's Social Capital Project finds that social capital among older Americans has declined over time. Americans approaching retirement age today tend to be less likely to have a spouse or companion, have fewer children. They tend to have fewer close friends and family members nearby, and tend to be less likely to attend church services regularly than they were 30 years ago. One bright spot is that many older Americans are more likely to be employed. The workplace seems to be an increasingly important source of social connection for these Americans. But Dr. Biggs, I agree with you that the best way to support older Americans who wish to work and to empower them in the workplace is to have a strong economy, and that means an economy with plenty of job opportunities. What types of general policies do you think would best support a strong labor market to make those things possible?
Thank you, Senator. I know you're running short of time, but the key here is to make a lot of jobs available to people. When you have many choices of jobs, the employer who discriminates is going to be forced out by the ones who don't. When you have many choices of jobs, that bids up wages. A lot of times there's a temptation to say, we don't want just jobs, we want jobs that this and this and this and this. And all of those benefits are things that make the employer less likely to hire you. You can mandate whatever benefits or protections you want, but if the employer doesn't want to hire older workers, they're not going to do it. So we have to have something where we have as many jobs as we possibly can, and then let the market push things up. Prior to the recession, we saw wages for the first time in many years increasing for low earners faster than they did for the very rich. And that's the sort of thing that warms my heart, because I want to see opportunities for people. So it's trying to make the market more vibrant. And sometimes that is at odds with trying to solve all of these individual problems that we look at.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Dr. Biggs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lee, very much. And we now yield the floor to my friend from Maryland, Congressman David Trump.
Thank you very much, Chairman Beyer and Ranking Member Lee, for holding this hearing. And thanks to our witnesses. As a fellow business guy like yourself, Mr. Chairman, it's so key that we have these older workers with us. We've lost 13 million Americans now in the workforce since the year 2000 to now. And we've got a tremendous shortage of workers, but these older workers bring such maturity, insights, and dedication that my company is just can't find enough folks in this age bracket. So let's talk a second. Dr. Gilliard, I've seen firsthand in our district how tough it is to re-enter the workforce. We had a paper mill close in Luke, Maryland, been open for 131 years. And all of a sudden, 800 workers out of jobs, needed retraining. Most of them were much older workers. We submitted a trade adjustment assistance application that was approved, and that helped them start on new career paths. But as we grow our economy, what role should retraining play in helping these older Americans succeed?
Right. You need more money at training programs. The training programs now are rewarded for placing people into jobs that pay as well or better than they had before. And if you have a lot of older workers in your training program, you're going to get a low score because older workers tend to make less than they did before, especially if they've lost a union job and are being trained for a lower union job. So you could raise wages, you know, through the congressional methods that you do. But the National Senior Employment Act is coming up for renewal. Those training programs need to be restructured and refunded.
Thank you. That's great. How do we combat age discrimination and dispel that myth that these older Americans, I mean, they are outstanding, and yet they're like, oh, he's too old for that job, or she is. It's crazy.
Yeah, lots of really good work in the gerontology and the social field to do that. We have to start, you know, with ourselves and stop making jokes about senior moments and fiddling with technology. That has to stop. But mainly, it's up to Congress again and the Justice Department. Age discrimination really can't be tolerated. And there are lots of proposals to make enforcement of the laws we already have tougher.
Thank you. Ms. Frye, in your testimony, you highlighted the importance of paid family and medical leave for older Americans. We all know as an employer, you know, I have 12,000 employees at my company. It's great for the employees. It's great for the employers. And it addresses the gender wage gap when it's provided to both spouses. So rather than expecting just a woman to take care of a sick family member, Ms. Frye, what can we do to encourage not just providing more paid family leave and medical leave benefits, but full utilization of these benefits by older workers?
You know, it's a great question. I think you're absolutely right that, you know, paid leave is really critical to enabling folks to manage their care responsibilities. And I think we have to reinforce the idea that paid family and medical leave is for all workers. It's not just a parental benefit. It's also to deal with older workers and their care needs. And we have to dispel the myths and sort of the cultural barriers that sometimes disincentivize people from taking leave, and recognize the point that you made, which is that, you know, by taking leaves, we can actually make workplaces more productive. We can often improve morale and strengthen the business productive efficiency and overall. So I think it's the combination of sending that message about why paid leave is important, and then creating the culture within the workplace to show that, in fact, when you take it, it's beneficial and supported.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on the culture piece, really key. Last quick question. My top priority in Congress has been the opioid crisis. And a lot of our older Americans have been hit hard by the opioid crisis. This is for Dr. Morrissey. And what we see is that between 1999 and 2019, the older American workers are there from 55 and up. They have a tenfold increase on addiction numbers, tenfold. So what things, Dr. Morrissey, should we do to ensure Americans struggling with substance use disorder have the resources to participate in the workplace?
Sorry. Yes, no, that is a really important point. There are economists who have written about the deaths of despair. We've seen an increasing uptick in suicides, in overdoses, and at all ages, and including, in many cases, older workers, and it's partly economic. Like, this is definitely concentrated among lower paid, less skilled workers, often jobless workers. And it's tragic. And I just want to put in one of the groups of older workers that we've seen leaving the workforce is actually therapists in fairly large numbers during the pandemic. And we need more therapists. We need more programs. We need much more funding for treatment and mental health services. There's no doubt about it. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. I yield back as chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Crone, very much. Now I recognize the senator from Texas, Senator Cruz. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right now, the American people are suffering from the impact of historic inflation brought about by President Biden and the Democrats' out of control and reckless spending. Our national debt has surpassed $30 trillion, and inflation is raging across the country, with our latest economic reports indicating that inflation has increased by 7% over the last year, the highest inflation this country has seen since 1982, 40 years ago. At the end of the day, this is not complicated. High inflation, which can happen when the federal government prints money to keep up with massive spending increases, presents a real problem for American families because it means that their dollars have less purchasing power as prices go up, and it erodes the value of their savings. As a result, it's more expensive for hardworking families to put food on their tables, to put gas in their cars, and to heat their homes. Even worse, inflation hurts the most vulnerable among us the most, including seniors who have diligently saved to spend their retirement years on fixed incomes and now find that their savings are worth less than they expected. Dr. Gilliard, would you agree that high inflation hurts our nation's seniors and hurts those living on a fixed income?
Yeah, one of the best things about Social Security is that it's inflation indexed. Healthcare prices, oddly, did not go up as much as inflation. So inflation hurts working families for sure, especially if their wages haven't caught up and haven't. But seniors who have Social Security actually got a big boost because of inflation. So it's ironic. I'm not downplaying it, but it's with healthcare not going up as much and Social Security being inflation indexed, they're a little bit more protected.
So I will note that in October 2013, you sent out a tweet that said reports on low cost of living adjustments suggest the system isn't working, but low inflation is good for fixed income seniors.
Yeah, sure. For those workers for those people who have to rely on 401k distributions, who don't have inflation indexed, sure. But in terms of the current situation now,
so your views have not
Social Security-
changed. Your views have not changed. You agree that high inflation hurts seniors.
It does, and we need to make sure our cost of living index reflects their patterns. But you asked me about right now, and there are
The reality right now is that prices are rising across the country, and family grocery bills continue to climb higher and higher. Let's review the prices of a handful of popular supermarket items. Over the last year, the price of steak is up 21.4%. The price of chicken is up 10.4%. The price of milk is up 4.2%. Eggs are up 11.1%, and even fresh fruits are up 7.9%. Dr. Gilliard, you recently wrote an article for Forbes in which you stated, quote, vegetarians can cope with inflation better than steak-eating Ford F-150 owners. And you suggest that for Americans to survive inflation by switching from expensive things to cheaper things and liking it. Well, I got to tell you, there's a whole lot of steak-eating Ford F-150 owners in the great state of Texas. And wouldn't it be a better way to help America suffering the effect of Biden's inflation crisis? Wouldn't it be better to adopt appropriate monetary policies, such as reining in out of control spending and debt, rather than forcing people to abandon their preferences, not eat steak, not drive trucks, change their lifestyle? It reminds me a little bit of the October 2021 Washington Post op-ed in which consumers were just told to, quote, lower your expectations. Is that the right answer for consumers?
Yeah, no. And thank you for reading my stuff. I was making the point that people can change their consumption, but that could be bad. I mean, eating quinoa when you want steak is a decline in the standard of living. Absolutely. But a lot of the places where we're seeing price increases is because of the concentration of monopolies and pricing power in those industries. So we have to look industry by industry to see what kinds of forces are forcing up those prices.
Well, I
Inflation.
understand that, but we're
Yeah.
seeing inflation across the board. I assume all of the witnesses today are familiar with the Congressional Budget Office and the Penn Wharton budget model. Dr. Gilliard, are you aware that their recent studies have confirmed that inflation costs the average U.S. household an incredible additional $5,000 per year?
Sure, and we're seeing wages go up, but not all places. Economists know that it affects different people differently, and we need to not let it go out of control. We're in agreement.
And an additional $5,000 a year hurts everybody, but particularly seniors and those on fixed incomes.
People on fixed incomes and low wages for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Dr. Gilliard. I would point out as a business person that BlackRock studies showed that virtually none of this inflation was due to policy decisions, but rather to the pandemic impacts on supply chain. And with that, let me recognize my friend, the former treasurer of Kansas and now distinguished Ways and Committee member, Dr. Estes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for joining us today. You know, obviously before COVID hit, we were concerned about the workforce and having enough workers as we move forward, and it's even more important now as we look at the coming out of COVID and moving forward and getting the economy going again. You know, I share the concerns mentioned earlier about inflation and the issues there, and we look at some of the decisions around curtailing like things like the Keystone Pipeline, and that had directly led to really higher gas prices that a lot of people are being impacted by while they drive their Ford 150s or even hybrid electric vehicles as well. Before the pandemic hit, our economy had taken off thanks to some of the pro-growth policies that really got Washington out of the way and returned economic freedom to the American people. By removing so many of the burdensome regulations that had halted growth, the prior administration gave entrepreneurs hope that they could succeed again in America. Today, I worry that many of our would-be entrepreneurs, especially those who are looking to innovate later in life, would be scared away from even trying. Anyone who wants to start a business today has to face supply chain disruptions, rising prices, higher taxes, and ever-changing Washington mandates. But these Americans are critical to our nation's success. Over their lives, they've acquired a tremendous number of skills and talents that benefit our nation. When we discuss the labor market, I think it's important to understand how new taxes, regulations, and government programs impact them and our economy. Raising new taxes on Americans to fund even more government programs isn't the solution. We have hundreds of redundant government programs. Before we create new ones and raise taxes to fund them, we need to look at structures that we already have on the books. Dr. Biggs, as you noted in your testimony, older Americans are faring quite well with more savings, lower poverty rates, and better retirement security today than in the past. And in 2020, during the height of the pandemic, only 11% of the retirees decided to quit because they couldn't find retirement or because they couldn't find employment. Seems that so many of the retirements are because Americans are choosing to retire. Looking at those trends, how should we as policymakers think about our role in supporting older Americans so that they can make work or retirement choices that are best for them?
Well, thank you, Congressman. We talked a little bit earlier about data on what is happening to people who've shifted from work into retirement during the COVID pandemic. And there is some debate over exactly what's happened. But I think it's interesting. If you look at people in this sort of the near retirement range, 60 to 65, who report themselves as being retired, and they're asked in a federal survey, would you like to go back to work if you could find a full-time job or a part-time job? And over 98% of those retirees say, no, I don't want to go back to work. And that's consistent with past data. And what this shows is most people are in fact retiring happily. They are, their incomes are okay. If you survey after survey, if you ask them, we keep telling retirees, oh, you're not doing so okay. And they're like, no, I'm all right. And so both the hard data, from statistical agencies and survey data show by and large they're doing fine. We have exceptions when we want to address them, but we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater because we've really done very, very well on this end. Now, thinking about where we want to go forward, I think we want to build on things. Dr. Gilliard, my fellow witnesses, talked about expanding options for retirement savings for people. And I agree with that. I think we probably agree on secondary payer issues with Medicare. Those are things we can do to further the progress that we're making. But I tend to my general philosophy, let's open the door to more jobs. Let's not start micromanaging exactly how all these things are going to work. Something like age discrimination, I oppose it, and when we know it's there, we should prosecute it. But there are potential downsides getting too aggressive on that, because there's some research that finds that aggressive age discrimination laws might actually reduce employment. So we just want to be careful about being over ambitious and thinking we can micromanage how the economy works, because the economy has a mind of its own that go beyond what federal policy can dictate.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that point. I mean, one of the things I did in my career in the private sector before I ran for public office was look at operational efficiencies, and as part of that, it came down into you look for the root cause of the problem. And so I want to make sure as we look for solutions that we're actually building solutions that actually are designed to fix the problem, and not something that may be a symptom of the problem, but not really what's causing it. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Justice, very much. I want to thank Congresswoman Herrera Butler for her extraordinary patience, and I think it is your turn to question.
Awesome. Hopefully, can you hear me okay? Just occurred to me. Okay, perfect. This has been an interesting conversation. I was with you, Mr. Chairman, in November. We got to sit and listen to an amazing economics professor with the London School of Economics, Linda Yu. I'm going to hopefully saying it correctly. And we were asking her some of these questions because, she talked about the growth in the economy, but we're not seeing that, and we're not seeing it in wages. And I remember asking her specifically about who's not working. And some of those questions have been answered here, like who left and who hasn't come back and the why. And she really narrowed it down for us. She was talking about workers who are about 50 years old, who are in the Rust Belt. Loss of working age men is a massive problem. She did talk about opioid use, and that scourge that kind of started with the Rust Belt obviously is being felt everywhere. And just trying to help me identify who's not working. And some of this fits in with what was being shared today. The other thing she really talked about was productivity. The productivity is low. And so when you're talking about older workers and the kind of the decline of manufacturing and stagnation in wages, how much of it is due to technology and how much of it is due to other factors? And she said about 80% of it was technological. So when I'm hearing all this, thinking about older workers, and really, we don't want to just put them on a program where they're not being productive. They're too smart for that. If you're working as an older American, you're doing it because you have to or because you love it. If you love it, generally, it's not a financial issue. If you have to, you have to. So how, in my mind, how do we get them into something that they can at least enjoy? And I think technological advancement training initiatives that will help both them, but also boost productivity, because that's ultimately how we get out of this stagnation. And I haven't really heard anybody talk about training opportunities in that sector. One of the things we talked about is about as everybody went offline, and some workers were fortunate enough to be able to use Zoom, and Zoom's available to everybody. But I think it was she talked about half of workers couldn't do Zoom for their job. So how do we make these transitions for older Americans? How do we help boost the productivity, but also bring them into a 21st century workforce? And that's really open to everybody.
Let's look at the industries that are really growing. It's home health care is 1.3 million of the new 12 million new jobs. So it's a big portion, the biggest portion of the new jobs created. How do you create better conditions and better technology and better productivity in home health and personal health care? Well, in other countries where the workers are paid a lot more, and this is a disproportionately sector that hires older workers. It's really characterized by old women taking care of even older women. They actually have a system of medication information. They have technology that helps lift patients. You see this in Japan. If you pay the workers more, the employers treat the workers better, often applying technology to their job.
Can I jump in there really quick? Because I've worked in home health. I've taken care of older women. And I've done this before, and it is grueling work. It's difficult. And I remember just trying to bless and serve some of these lonely women and knowing that this was only going to grow. These were women on state aid. They were not living in the life of luxury. And one of the things that I think is critical is that if we're going to talk, we have to find a way to also boost some areas we as a society are going to put money into, because I am not going to allow my grandma or your grandma to live on the street, like, period. That may not be a boost to overall GDP growth and productivity in the economy.
Mhm.
We have to balance this if we're going to spend that money, right? Because again, I don't want your grandma out there. I sure as heck don't want mine. So how do we also then, I'm not even thinking about necessarily the workers in that space, although we have to make sure that they're in a good place. But seniors who are coming out of a job and maybe having to get retrained into something else
Yeah.
to boost the productivity, because ultimately that's what
Yeah.
a company needs in order to expand here, correct?
Yeah, some of that will be corrected by the market, where the employers are finally going to get over the fact that they don't want older workers because they cost more, or because they they perceive them not to have technological change. So that can take care of it. Andrew's right about that. But remember my answer about the training programs are not incented to actually help older workers. And really, the low income senior program to help apprenticeship has 68,000 people in it, and we have millions of people who need that training.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time. There's no possible chance, just because I brought up the rear, that Mr. Biggs could maybe do a quick comment on that. Is there?
I think that would be fine.
Thank you.
And then Mr. Arrington is going to bring up the rear. And we're going to go for another round too, if you'd like to care. Like to stay, but go ahead, Dr. Biggs.
Well, thank you. I'm going to take my time while it's on offer. Thank you very much, Congresswoman. This is a slightly different tack, but I think it goes back to some of the points Senator Lee made at the beginning about social capital. And this actually has direct impacts on things like long-term care, that in the past, a lot of long-term care was done informally, that one spouse would care for the other, the extended families. I mean, I moved from Washington, D.C. to Oregon so that I could be closer to my wife's family. My son would be near his grandparents. As families have broken down, more and more retirees are living alone. And that forces them to rely more on professional care, while they're in declining health, and they may push more of them into long-term care if they don't have somebody to care for them. This obviously has an impact on them. There's an impact on the labor market. It's going to have an impact on the budget, because Medicaid long-term care costs are going to go up because our social fabric has broken down. And so all of these things are interrelated with each other. Something like home health care, the productivity there is tough to increase because it really is a very, very labor intensive task. It's hard. If we want to group people together, say 10 seniors all live in a home, then maybe we can increase the productivity of the home health care worker.
Yeah.
It's a very, very tough thing to get on top of.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now let me recognize my friend from Texas, Mr. Arrington, for his questions.
Thank you, Chairman Beyer, and the witnesses, and I've enjoyed the back and forth and gained some new insights here on a very important topic of our older workers who want to stay. It appears that the job participation rate is better among the older workers, so they seem to want to stay if they can. We've got to get our economy back where they have that choice and can exercise their choice to stay in the workplace longer. I think that's the most important thing, and we don't need to do any more harm, in my opinion, with respect to labor shortage and inflation, the input cost, and all the stresses on the economy currently. But I have a broader question about those companies who are doing well at attracting and retaining older workers. I'm sure there's more time spent on millennials and other generations and what they need and what they're looking for to stay incentivized to be not only at work but most productive. What does that look like for the older worker? And anybody can answer this, but and Dr. Biggs, maybe you can start, but I'll just welcome anybody to jump in. What companies are doing the best in that regard, and what states are doing the best? So both private incentives and maybe even state public incentives or programs in combination that are working to keep these folks in the game longer. Obviously, I think there are personal quality of life benefits for these older workers as has been discussed. So some thoughts on that.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman. I'll be honest, I don't know the state level data very well. It wouldn't be difficult to produce it, but often we focus at the federal level, and those are just the data that I know better, but I can take a look into that. I mean, thinking about companies or industries, Professor Gilliard talked a little bit earlier about how some of the growth is in service-related jobs, home healthcare areas such as those. I think offering flexibility to your employees is helpful. At those ages, many people want to work part-time. And so giving them the opportunity to do that, I think, is helpful. Offering flexibility in terms of the place where you work, again, because people want to stay near their families. But there's a lot of employment at older ages in small firms. It's maybe a little easier to them. If you're under 20 or so employees, you don't need to offer healthcare, and that's a big issue for small employers because healthcare costs have gotten higher and higher, and that's disproportionately on older employees. So I completely agree with you, thinking of strategies to make it easier for them. But if I think big picture, something like reducing healthcare costs, we think of it in this macro perspective or budgetary perspective. When Dr. Gilliard talked earlier about how there's lower returns to experience in the labor force today than there used to be, that means lower increases in people's wages as they get older. But what is happening, though, is employers are paying more and more in terms of healthcare costs, and that comes out of people's wages. Most economists will agree on that. So simply trying to reduce healthcare costs, not reallocate them, not think how to finance them, but how to actually reduce these costs, that is a bonus that makes older workers more attractive to employers, makes work more attractive to older workers because it passes through their wages. So there are micro things we can do, but I think healthcare is a real macro issue that if we can get on top of it, it reaps dividends for the budget, but really for employees as well.
Well, thank you. And just to follow up with you, in the interest of time, Dr. Biggs, you touched on the Social Security benefit formula that disincentivizes folks to stay in the workforce longer. But research proves out that Americans prefer private savings accounts versus expanding Social Security. I think they get a better return. They get more choice in that, obviously. What incentives should Mr. Byer, as a Ways and Means member, myself and others, be looking to put in place to encourage more private savings on top of our efforts to have to address the solvency problem with Social Security? Because I do think that's a very important safety net. I'm talking about additive.
Thanks very much. I know you're running out of time here, so if I have to be cut off, let me know. But I mean, I commissioned a survey where I asked Americans, if you want to increase your retirement income, would you rather pay more into Social Security and get more from Social Security? Or would you rather save more on your own through an IRA and a 401k and get more from that in retirement? Across the board, about 3/4 of Americans would prefer to save more on their own. So that private saving really is attractive to people. They trust it. They feel they can control it. Some want to build wealth and pass it on. But the issue is, how do we expand that? Things like automatic enrollment, which should pass in the Pension Protection Act, that has helped. But we want to think about how we expand access. ultimately, I think something, some sort of federal plan for workers at small businesses who can't get a retirement plan through their employer makes sense. We also want to think about things like lawsuits against employers regarding 401ks. That is going to disincentivize offering those plans. Again, it's, we can lead the horse to water, we can't make it drink. And you want to think of incentives that make it attractive to people and reducing disincentives to do that.
Thanks for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Biggs, for your comments.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Aronson, very much. We're going to go to a second round for those who'd like to stay. And let me start. Dr. Gilliard, Dr. Biggs was talking specifically about workers left out of potential retirement things. Can you talk about your TSP for some or the guaranteed retirement accounts?
Yeah, I think Representative Arrington would be interested in this as well, and everybody, because it's a bipartisan plan. Kevin Hassett, who was former Trump's chief economist, and me, and we are really far apart in terms of ideology, have come together as economists by looking at the thrift savings plan about how well it works. And it works well by getting lower income people into it because it provides a match. So we have proposed a very detailed plan for the government to provide a match to people who earn below the median wage. And this would allow them to participate in a program that's modeled after the TSP, perhaps be a sidecar to the thrift savings plan, so they can start accumulating assets. My testimony today pointed out that that will help the labor market because with more retirement security, the people who are forced out early or who truly want to stay but have a fallback position would have better jobs. So it's a virtuous circle.
Thank you very much. Ms. Frye, in his testimony, Dr. Biggs tells us that extended work lives may be an even better way to increase retirement income security than other ideas, but why can't everybody just work longer? Have we seen difference in life expectancy gains among different categories of Americans?
Well, absolutely. It goes without saying that, not everybody lives the same length of time. And we certainly see disparities along race and ethnicity in particular. I think that it also goes back to the conversation that people were having about the nature of work and the work that many people are doing. If you look at many older workers of color, particularly older Black workers, both women and men, they're a significant percentage, 1 in 3 older women of color in jobs that are physically demanding. So even if they want to stay longer, they often can't. The lifting and the physical exertion is excessive. So I think it's not as simple as saying they just want to work longer, but also, making sure that they can take care of themselves and have the ability to care for their own well-being and their families and have the income to do so. So you really have to understand sort of the differences along race and gender and the different ways that people come to the table.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Gilliard, you and Dr. Biggs agreed on Medicare as first payer, which certainly makes a lot of sense. Have people priced that out before? Have we attempted to do this, and does the price tag scare us away?
It's not that scary, but it's positive. It's in the tens of billions. However, it never factors in how much healthier the workers will be, or people will be when they, as they age into Medicare. If you can get health insurance to people quickly, also if you lower the age, I usually pair this with lowering the age so that if you're out of work at 58, you still have health insurance. That can save money, but it's really important for smaller businesses that have health insurance for all their workers because they won't get the hit on the experience rating when an older worker comes in. That answers Representative Harrington's question. What kinds of companies are more open to older workers? And it's bigger ones. And a lot of it is because they can absorb that health insurance cost.
Would it almost be like a reverse positive incentive to get the older worker in because they're less expensive?
Yeah, good point.
Dr. Morrissey, I was impressed with Dr. Biggs pointing out to me that I'm at 71 and a half, I'm paying into Social Security. I'm not getting anything for it. As have you or as AFL-CIO in your various roles considered the notion of once you've maxed out what your Social Security return is, that you shouldn't have to pay in anymore? You know,
Well, first of
past
all-
say 70 or 71. Or,
Well, first of all, you should be tapping Social Security. After 70, you don't get any advantage for delaying. So you should go right now. Well, actually, after
Oh,
April, when the offices open up again,
No,
and,
no,
and start collecting.
I do get my check every month, but
Okay.
paying
But
in
any-
doesn't change it at all. So yeah.
No, but that's a really good question. I actually have a lot of disagreements with Dr. Biggs on a lot of these points. He conjures up an image where, that workers want to work longer, they can work longer. As a result, they're more comfortable, except that there's this little problem, which is that extra benefits will create a disincentive to work. So any expansion of Social Security or something like that is going to actually harm this happy scene that he has created where, we're working longer, it's all happy, it's by choice, and older Americans are comfortable. None of that is actually true. I'm sorry to be disagreeable, but for example, just to get onto the comfortable thing, when you do international comparisons, the reason that Americans look like on the surface that they're doing well at older ages is because they're working, they're having to work. If you take, and whereas Europeans are at leisure at the same age. So, and also the other thing is that last year we had this record-breaking low poverty rate because of transfers last year that were unique to last year. And also because we use a measure of poverty that's not very realistic. If you use the supplemental poverty measure, even last year, seniors were actually at, much more, had higher poverty rates than working age Americans. In terms of whether they want and can to work longer, and I'm sorry I'm going over, but I think that the Democratic witnesses here have gotten less time to contribute. In terms of whether or not they can work longer, research by Richard Johnson and co-authors at the Urban Institute has looked very closely at this. And he looked even zeroed in on workers who had stable employment, who were 5 years or more with the same employer in their early 50s. And 2/3 of those workers experience involuntary job loss before they retired, and only 1/10 of those that lost their jobs actually managed to get earnings anywhere close to where they were before. So it's not at all a choice. Most workers, for health reasons, because they're laid off, even if they expect to retire or want to retire later, they can't. And finally, and I'm sorry to again use up a lot of time, but the idea now, Dr. Biggs made a strong point early that workers have a very, very strong incentive to keep working for the reasons you mentioned, that if the longer you work, the less time you have to support yourself in retirement, the more you can save, and your benefits are also higher up until age 70 in terms of Social Security. All of these factors hugely overwhelm any supposed disincentive effects of paying taxes for benefits. In fact, the benefits that we've been talking about that we need, paid leave and everything like that, would draw more workers into the workforce. What we've seen in the pandemic is workers leaving because they're scared to work, because they don't have sick leave, because they're in danger. So in fact, it's completely backwards. The more we protect workers, the more benefits that protect workers, the more we're going to keep older workers into the workforce. I do agree that we should do stuff, take measures to equalize healthcare costs by age. I'm not sure that for incentivizing people to hire older workers would be viewed as fair, like making it completely free for them, for employers to have healthcare, but still paying for younger workers. But nonetheless, we do need to take that out of the equation in some form, but it's expensive. I mean, we haven't even been able to fix the problem that people are waiting for Medicare when they're disabled, which I think is a really critical problem right now. And that's much smaller amount of money. So, but anyhow, I'm sorry to eat up the time, but I had a lot to rebut. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Biggs had the advantage of having many Republicans show up to ask questions, and we had Senator Klobuchar and Mr. Trone. So, Mr. Arrington, you're welcome to a second round of questions.
I'm just going to give Dr. Biggs a chance to defend his honor. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. This is all very, I love the passion, and we, I think, all want to address the challenges and the problems. We have different ways to do that. That's my experience, at least, that most folks' motives are to help our fellow Americans. But I will say that inflation, and not to beat up my Democrat colleagues on the count of the spending, I had a just on that piece. We had a former Federal Reserve president of the Kansas City Reserve Bank, Tom Honig, talk about the easy money policies that have contributed to inflation as they did in the 70s. And not only is it the most punitive, regressive tax on everybody, especially the working poor, but it also has given a greater gap and separation between the haves and have-nots, because those who have assets have seen their asset values go up. So the sort of rich got richer, and those that didn't have asset ownership in land and stocks and bonds, et cetera, they were out of luck. So I think that's it's a double whammy for the folks that I think we all want to help the most in this country. I'm particularly concerned about, when we talk about retirement security, the unfunded liabilities that are in the state pensions. I know in 2010, the unfunded liability in the New Jersey state pension was $1 trillion. And I don't know how much in the system there is. I can't quantify it. I'm sure, Dr. Biggs, you've looked at it, as have others. But what do we do with this? It may be a bit of a crisis if it's not addressed. I thought the Butch Lewis legislation and the monies in ARPA that went to bailing out the union pensions was horrible, not because we don't have to spend some money to solve the problem, but because we never address the underlying causes so that we don't have to repeat it. So I guess, what do we do about the underlying causes so we don't create moral hazard? But then how do we address it to give that sense of, not just sense, but real retirement security for these folks who are depending on it?
Well, if I can answer, Congressman, it's a great question. I've done a lot of work on state and local pensions, including a recent report on New Jersey. I was appointed to the Financial Oversight Board for Puerto Rico, which is bankrupt in part because of my background on state and local government pensions. Those are a big problem, and a comparison to Social Security is helpful. I mean, we talk about, is the Social Security trust fund real and all that. If the trust fund runs out, there's a legal implication to it. But financially, for the federal government as a whole, it doesn't matter very much. If a state pension trust fund runs out, if you're New Jersey or Illinois, if their pension fund runs out, that state is bankrupt, because that is real money from outside the government they are using to pay their pension benefits. And if it's gone, they've got a real problem. Puerto Rico went bankrupt in part because they ran their pensions into the ground. One point I would make on that is that when ERISA was passed, ERISA is the federal legislation that regulates pensions. At that point, there was some discussion of putting state and local government pensions into ERISA so they would be regulated as well. But the thought at that point was, states, pensions aren't that big a deal for them. States are good actors. They're not going to shortchange their workers and all that. All of that turned out to be false. The state pensions if they were federally regulated, you would be shutting these pensions down because they are very, very poorly funded. And if you think that the federal government having to bail out the multi-employer plans was a problem, when the federal government said we are going to bail out those plans for which it had zero responsibility, dollars to donuts. If Illinois or New Jersey or Connecticut or one of these states goes under, that is a systemic threat to the state's economy, to the whole region. The federal government will bail those out. They should simply be federally regulated, the same as private pensions are.
Chairman Byard, thank you for letting us have another round. And I just really appreciate all the insight. And I meant to say all that about the Federal Reserve monetary policy and the contribution and the to the inflationary effects, and that whole greater income gap as a result. I said that to mention to Dr. Gilliard that I like that idea, that I need to dig in, but I like the idea, especially on the lower income, of encouraging work, but giving people a piece of of the action and ownership in our country and benefit like folks at the higher income who just seem to have exponential benefits to having assets and ownership.
That's right on. I'll follow up with you on that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Chairman Byer, safe travels.
Thank you, Congressman Harrington, very much. So that concludes our session today. I want to thank all of you for joining me in this essential conversation on a really important topic. Older workers are an integral part of our American economy, and their participation in the labor market is going to continue to grow. However, we know the pandemic's thrown a wrench into this trend. It's harmed workers, businesses, and the economy, but it's also shed new light on the longstanding challenges that older workers face. As we've discussed today, while many stories have focused on financially secure older workers leaving the labor force to better enjoy their golden years, a closer evidence looks that this is really not the case for many. For decades, older workers have faced weakened bargaining power, poor quality of work, sluggish wage growth, and retirement insecurity, and the pandemic has exacerbated these pre-existing trends. Addressing these challenges requires public policy solutions, many of which you've offered today, that improve the economic security of older workers and strengthen the labor market for all working Americans. Our shared prosperity and economic well-being depend on it. So thank you to each of our panelists for their contributions. As we do this important work, we will continue to rely on your expertise and good faith. And thank you as well to my colleagues for being part of this discussion and sharing your wisdom. The record will remain open for 3 business days. This hearing is now adjourned.